Let's see what the stew has for us today. Welcome to the Gnomecast, the Gnome Stew's tabletop gaming advice podcast. Here we talk with the other gnomes about gaming things to avoid becoming part of the stew, so I guess we'd better be good. Today we have a little bit of a special break here. Instead of Ange, you have me, Jared, the review gnome, and I'll be doing an interview for you today.
Capers, a superpowered game of gangsters in the Roaring Twenties. With this game, you get to play criminals or cops during the Prohibition era, but with superpowers. Do you build a criminal empire or bring the bootleggers down? The Kickstarter for the Deluxe hardcover launched on January 7th. A gorgeous 164-page book, 8.5 by 11, hardcover with Smythe sewn binding that is sturdy and will allow the book to lay flat while open. Glossy full-cover interior and 2 ribbon bookmarks to help keep track of the information you need for your game. There are backer tiers for getting the Deluxe hardcover with all the support PDFs, or if you want just the book or just the PDF. Head on over to Kickstarter now to become a backer for Capers.
Today on the Gnomecast, we're bringing you an interview with the designer of the Demihumans RPG. Would you like to introduce yourself for the Gnomecast listeners?
Hi, everybody. I'm Robert Bohl.
And what might people know you from in the RPG hobby?
Probably the single way most people in the world know of me is if they watch Tabletop with Will Wheaton. They played my game, Misspent Youth, with Matt Fraction, Kelly DeConnick, and Amy Dallin, with Will Wheaton GMing. So that was really cool. And so Misspent Youth is a teenage rebellion in a dystopian future game. Oh, I should ask, should I watch my language?
Yeah, the Gnomecast is usually PG-13 or lower.
Right. So I won't give the real subtitle to the game, but the idea is that it's about teenagers in the future stopping a dystopian future. And then the other sort of notable thing I've done is I was the 2016 Game Chef English language winner for Beyond Our Walls, which is in some ways kind of like a precursor to this game, in that the language, to the game we're discussing today, Demihumans, in that the language is very specific. I wouldn't call it quite as flowery as Demihumans is, but I was basically adopting some of the language rules from the Spartacus TV show, and like just trying to produce I can't seem to not write in voice, so that's what I was doing there.
What's interesting is I actually watched that episode of Tabletop and I completely blanked that was your game because I remember that one.
Yeah, they even got art from the cover artist. It was great.
Would you like to tell us what Demihumans is about?
Sure. So it's like a apocalypse world game where the apocalypse is sort of in the middle of happening, and it's the death of magic and thus magical people. It's also sort of the elven alien age game from like Dragon Age, or like it's Tolkien's, man's age, where the halflings are all getting taller and the elves are all leaving and that kind of stuff. So the idea is that you are telling the story of a non-human enclave, a neighborhood or ghetto or a municipality or sector or whatever in a human city. So long ago, there was a war between orcs and humans trying to genocide each other, and the humans won. And so now, in doing so, they broke magic, so everything's sort of falling apart. And it's about those people in the face of what seems like certain doom, trying to build a community and live their lives.
All right, what is your history with Powered by the Apocalypse games?
I'm actually proud to say I was in a pre-publication playtest with Vincent.
Nice.
Because I was lucky enough to live in his area as he was developing the game. So yeah, I played a bit in that, and then I've played a few sort of PBTA games and sessions, mostly just as one-offs after that, except for I did a long con once. And but actually where I really, really like came to understand PBTA design is in writing this game. And because the way I wrote this game initially was to take the Apocalypse World 2 text and just rewrite it as my game,
Mm-hmm.
And then, in the samurai sword folding over and over again way that you do when you were creating a game, it eventually, there's very few words or even structures that are linguistic structures that are that similar to the original book. But I I certainly came to understand Apocalypse World very well, or at least the parts that I'm stealing, which is like 90% of it.
What do you think about Powered by the Apocalypse games appealed to you to use that as the framework that you built on?
Honestly, the initial idea was like Apocalypse World fantasy. What would that be? And specifically the apocalypse part, because there's, Dungeon World, which is like fantasy using Powered by the Apocalypse. But I always wondered what, it actually, I think initially Vincent was a long time ago was talking about the Dragon Killers, I think is what it was called, or the Dragon Hunters. And that was going to be his like apocalypse. I think like a dragon had just died or something, and like that was going to end the world, or the world had ended previously. Anyway, I think he never actually wound up making that, and then instead created like Fallen Empires, which is like the fantasy hack, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem as heavy on the. It's sort of like a historical fiction Middle Ages thing, as opposed to me to being like an apocalypse thing. Yeah.
Right.
And also because when the idea to make it a community based game is largely came out of my noticing that you could take the hard holder and give the hard holder's moves to everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and thereby create a community game.
So I am going to satisfy my own curiosity here, because I've played a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games, but I have not. A lot of them have been like second and third generation games. So I haven't played a lot of games that use stat highlighting for advancement.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if I could pick your brain on why that appealed to you to use that particular means of advancement. And for anybody that hasn't played a Powered by the Apocalypse game that uses stat highlighting, could you explain that a little bit for people?
Sure. So a lot of the answers to why I did this are that it is a hack of Apocalypse World per se. And so a lot of times I'm like, well, this is an Apocalypse World. Does it work in my game? And if it does, it stays.
Mm-hmm.
But specifically why I've always liked that, it reminds me of one of my favorite things from one of my favorite games, Primetime Adventures, where there's the fan mail system, where when someone does something you like, you give them a point from this common pool that needs to be given out.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a way to directly signal people what you like and what you want to see more of. And that's really what I like about it. And it seems sort of Apocalypse World is not antagonistic per se between the characters, but it certainly has that rep. And so it's interesting to me that there's that phase where it's like, I want to see this from you.
Right.
And that's really important to me. And I also feel like the step of the Demiurge, which is the MC like role in this game, the step of the Demiurge selecting something really helps with one of the principles, which is, make the characters your heroes, because you're having to say all the time, well, I want to make sure you do well, so I'm going to give you the high plus, or like everyone's already taken your good stats, I'm going to pick the stat that I love about you or that I'd love to see you. Like it gives the Demiurge an opportunity to be a fan as well in a very concrete way, and to remind them, hey, you're a fan at the start of every session.
All right. Speaking of mechanics that I have seen in other games and that are a little bit different in this, when I was reading the intimacy moves, those kind of jumped out at me, because I'm used to either Apocalypse World or, say, like Urban Shadows has, when you share something intimate with someone else. These actually read a little bit different. Would you care to go into how the intimacy moves work in Demihumans?
Yeah, so one of the key things in this game is about describing the culture of your people. And I'll say, by the way, that the game does not use the word race ever. It uses the word racist a few times, but it only ever uses the word people. Because honestly, I think we get into some unfortunate circumstances using that word, especially for people that are so different much more different from one another than real humans are.
Yeah, definitely.
And then also you get uncomfortable things like a book called, Hidden Talents of the Dark Races or something. And it's just like, makes us look terrible.
Yeah, definitely.
So anyway, one of the key features of this is of the game and purposes of the game is to identify what elven culture is, what gnomish culture is. And so the intimacy move is about intimately sharing culture with someone. So you sit down one-on-one with the example I gave in the book is this elf is taking his friend's daughter through the pre-dawn woods and picking out a salad of petals and flower petals and grubs like his mother's used to make with him. So the idea there is, that's an intimate moment between two people. It's sharing something that the elf culture did or does. And it can also be sex, like intimately sharing culture. The culture that you're sharing could be, this is how we reproduce, or mate or marry or whatever.
Right.
So I wanted there, in the apocalypse world sense, to be there, that room, if people wanted to sort of tell the story of people falling in love and expressing that love. But also, what matters a lot more to me is that trigger, their culture trigger.
Right. Yeah. And I really liked how that read when I was looking through the document. On that same sort of thing about, nuances that convey culture, the lifestyle section of the playbooks has situations where the players are going to decide whether they spend gold on a certain thing, and it gives them kind of a prescribed set of things that they would do to make money. Would you like to discuss that any?
Sure, yeah. So lifestyle is one of those pretty close ports from Apocalypse World, where in Apocalypse World you have to pay one barter at the start of the game. And if you don't have barter, it lists a series of jobs. And the jobs are natural largely to the playbook. It's like, oh yeah, that's what that person would do in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
But the economic aspect of this game is really important, because humans, whether they're consciously, mustache twirling oppressors or unaware and bowling, destroying culture anyway, there is an economy in the game, and the gold economy. And the gold economy measures what humans value. So like you could be, for example, maybe you're an extraordinarily wealthy elf as far as elves are concerned, but you only get 3 gold because you only have that roughly that much of what humans care about. And so a key feature in Apocalypse World and in this game is scarcity. And this is even meaner than Apocalypse World's lifestyle, because it's only ever 1 for Apocalypse World. Whereas in a lot of these, it's like you could pay 1 and only take 1 harm, or you can pay 2. So that makes it even harder. And then what happens is a lot of these questions are super, super mean. It's like, or a lot of these job opportunities, like, for the elf, you can teach a hidden secret of magic to, a demiurge character, or you can like appear as a curiosity at a party, And one of the options, as in almost everywhere in this game, one of the options is devise something on your own or devise something with the demiurge.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not locked into these degrading options, but I wanted the playbooks to indicate what kinds of things humans thought you were good for. They're mostly negative. Some are nice. Some are about capability, but also largely capability from the human perspective. And it's even harder on some. So like the Elven Spark Singer, the Orcish Warbander, the Trollish Green Ward, they're all negative. All of their pre-given job options are negative. And that's pointed. Like the Spark Singer, elves have weariness. They're not long for this world. And every time something tragic happens, you mark a little petal on your flower of weariness, and you come closer to going to the next world.
Mm-hmm.
So they're sort of under pressure in that way, because they don't fit in this world anymore. The Warbender, it's a lot more, the Orcish Warbender, it's a lot more about like, well, we fought a war and we lost, and now we've got if any human knows about any non-human, it's an orc, and they're afraid of them, and so they don't have a lot of what humans have to offer because their lives are hard right now. But the Warbander, so like the playbooks are not like, this is the elf, these are what elves are like. They're sort of 2-part names. So it's like the Elvish Spark Singer is someone who sings to the spark of the dying unreal and brings it back to life temporarily to do some magic. So the Warbander is a warrior protecting their tribe of non-combatant orcs, who are twice as many as there are in the Warband. And so the Warbander doesn't need that much, because that playbook is a warrior. Orcish culture is not necessarily a warrior culture, but you're playing somebody who is a warrior. So to show how badass they are, that, it's like, oh, well, I only need 1 gold. But all of the job options are negative, because it's things like, well, humans think you can kill people and that you can steal things, and like that's what happens. And then the Trollish Green Ward is like, he's the closest, or they're the closest that I come to, is like one of the things going in this game, in addition to cultural death, is it's sort of also about megafauna, like environmental collapse, because
Mm-hmm.
part of why these people can't live anymore is the world is changing to not be a place where they can live. And, like whenever I hear a story about a lion pack that kills a poacher, I'm like, those are orcs, because they're not going to, I'm very sad to say this, I don't think there's going to be a future with lots of lion packs, but those guys are like, well, I'm going to spit in your eye on my way down.
Yeah.
And the Green Ward is that. The Green Ward frequently suffers for being in civilization and finds things more difficult and a burning irritant and stuff. So they have especially bad outcomes as compared to like halflings and dwarves and gnomes who have things that humans value more. And then finally, the trader has it best off. The trader, who is the human who makes common cause with the non-humans by living in the Enclave and trying to keep it alive. So like as its name suggests, it's a traitor. A lot of the books are like presumed to be what humans would call them. So like the traitor is a traitor to humankind, but also potentially it works two ways. It's potentially a traitor to the Enclave, and you could play it that way on purpose or by accident. So the human has 8 gold at the start of play and only has to pay 1 at upkeep. And most of the jobs are either neutral with little consequence for him, but it's about, maybe betraying the Enclave or something,
Mm-hmm.
or positive. Like there's very few playbooks that have here's a job that makes things better. And the human has an option to like try and soothe things between humans and non-humans. And that's so unfair. And I want people to be like, why is this so easy for me? Like the way that this works is if there's a traitor in your group, by the second or third game, most people are going to be trying really hard, getting in dangerous situations and putting their dignities on the line to get by. And the traitor's going to be like, I got plenty of gold. Someone want me to pay for them, which is like a nice, fun thing. But also people are going to be looking at you like, motherfucker.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something that came across there. The names and how all of the economy works for each individual ones, that was really strong for conveying the idea that I don't think anyone's going to read through this, and if they're paying attention, get the feeling that this is just a standard high fantasy romp. There is definitely more going on under the hood, trying to get across a deeper message there, and I really appreciate that.
I'm glad that comes across so well.
Oh, definitely. And another thing that I noticed about that is there's a couple of the playbooks that have a move where they can advise someone else. And what I thought was really interesting about that is some of that advice is not good it makes sense for the culture of the person giving the advice, but if the person following the advice follows it, it may not work out well for them. And I thought that was really interesting. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about that a little.
Yeah. So like, I like the idea of offering another player advice, but I think the moves that do that in Apocalypse World can be tough on the person who takes the move, because you have to wait around for someone to come to you and be like, this is what I think you should do. And you're like, okay, great, I'm going to do that. So instead, I think I know I have at least 2. There's more than that probably. There's 3 advicey sort of moves that I can think of offhand. And one is for the dwarf, where it's like the dwarf comes up to you and says, this is what you should do. And then you either take that or you don't. But if the dwarf thinks that you're doing right and you're doing the sorts of things you ought to do, then things will go well for you. Whereas with but also if it goes badly, that's the one very specifically where the dwarf says, well, you've given good advice for orcs. I mean, for dwarves, that's no good for the person that you gave advice to. The gnomish inventor leans more on the inventor side in some ways, although if you want to have gnomish culture be this way, you could, which is that I've got this crazy idea that's definitely going to cause chaos, but I think it's going to work, and I think you should follow it. And that's sort of like, it's a different kind of imposition than the dwarven lawgiver is giving, because it's about like, hey, this is going to go bad maybe, and it has a different flavor, but it's a similar kind of imposition. Whereas the human, the trader, has as their required move, everyone gets a free magic move, and the human doesn't have a native magic move. So instead, they have shut up and listen, which says that if you take advice, or if you ask advice, of someone who isn't human on how to deal with a situation, and it costs you, it's going to mark experience, you know? So I think also because you can't, so like, it's important to say, like, those are all each saying something about those cultures, but they're also goads to role playing. You know, it's like you once you have that move, you're going to be looking for a way to use it, or to, you know, to have someone give you the advice if you're the human. And that's like, it's pushing people to interact.
Yeah, definitely. And let me just say, if someone reading that move for the human picks up on the idea that maybe someone in a position of privilege should listen and there is a benefit to doing that, that would be a great thing.
Yeah. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I have to credit Fred Hicks. He was at Dreamation watching me play, and he was like, I think this should be required, because how do you get by in this enclave if you haven't learned how to listen?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, and how can you be the hero of this enclave if you haven't learned to listen? And I was like, you're right. And also, the nice thing I liked about that is that before, I was playing on the trope that humans have more flexibility.
Yeah.
And, you know, humans can steal magic. That's how they get magic, is if they've stolen it, or they've been taught it. But what I've done here is I've taken that flexibility away. Now they have just the same number of choices as everyone else, actually less, because every playbook, they're in the book, there's an additional magic move if you don't like the one that's in your playbook, and the human doesn't have that, or the trader doesn't have that.
Mm-hmm.
So I like this. The game is unfair to the trader. It's not a balanced game. Elves are better, because that's, you know, a Tolkien thing. Elves are better. And the game is tough on the trader, because even though it's easy in a lot of ways on the trader, it's mean. The game is mean to the trader.
Yeah, and also to a certain extent, going back to, you know, going back to the lifestyle move, it's like, think about why you're in a better position. You started off in a better position.
Yeah, I actually had a player in a game say to me, you know, I've got this good option and everyone else has so many bad options. Like, why is that? And I just kind of smiled at him. I was like, yeah, you do. I was like, oh.
One of the other things that I noticed, speaking of the dynamics in the enclave between the different people, is that a lot of the relationship questions are very pointed. Like, it's not just, you know, this person and you had a great time with them. It's kind of like, in several situations, it's almost leads to some uncomfortable connections between people.
Yeah, the Warbender has the one, like, how do I feel about how you killed my sister? And that's probably the most pointed one. Yeah. And I wanted to, initially someone had suggested, well, what if it's just like beat her in a fight? And I was like, well, what this says is that this is the kind of person who can have their sister killed and potentially be okay with a person, you know? And so that's interesting to me, because just beating someone in a fight is nowhere near as impactful as losing a family member, especially for people who have so few people left, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I wanted to, it's kind of about scarcity again. So like the company, which is the name for the group of characters in Demihumans, is closer than an Apocalypse World PC group, because so what it says in Apocalypse World is you may not be friends, but you know each other at the start of play. And then it goes from there.
Yeah.
Whereas this game says you may not be friends, but you know each other. And if you're playing this game, just like if you're playing Mouse Guard, you're choosing to play a member of the Mouse Guard.
Mm-hmm.
If you play this game, you're choosing to play someone who lives in this community and is trying to keep it alive. Now, you might have diametrically opposed ideas of what that means, but you still share that goal. And so since they're closer, I feel like I have to push harder to introduce that tension probably than Apocalypse World does,
mm-hmm.
and make things a little spikier. But honestly, also, it's about oppression and scarcity, right? Like, so scarcity that I'm always trying to drive home is you don't necessarily have all good relationships with the people that you have to work with to keep this place going.
Yeah.
And oppression is oppressive systems split people. Like, maybe in your world, the orcs started out as way back when as relatively gentle people before the war, and now they've become the kind of people who can get over losing a sibling because of what they choose to do in the war, or maybe what was done to them, or how this person has reacted to it. So yeah, I want it to be about how hard it is when you're oppressed and don't have anything to get solidarity.
Oh yeah, definitely. And the funny thing, every time you mention the Warbander, I noticed this, and I mentioned this when I emailed you before, but I have just finished watching Star Trek Discovery, and I noticed a few of the orc names kind of overlap a little bit there. And when you're talking about that, about not being able to pick your allies, it really reminded me of like, I did not like Laurel at the beginning of this, and Laurel becomes like one of the most sympathetic people in there as it progresses. And that really reminded me of that point when you were discussing that.
Yeah, I'm watching The Expanse now, and in the third season there's this dynamic among the Belters where like these people are like shooting at each other, and then they're like best friends, and like it's really, I like that complexity a lot.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Oh, and I should also mention, by the way, that if you look closely at the playbooks, there's all kinds of Easter eggs for all sorts of geek media, in the names especially.
Yeah, and once you said that, I was thinking I need to go back through these, but it was just because I had just been watching Discovery when I got to the Warpander, I was like, oh, I see what he's doing here. Now, another thing that I noticed, and you were talking about the Enclave and trying to keep it alive, and the Enclave itself kind of has its own playbook. Did you want to talk about that any?
Yeah, so like the Enclave has its own playbook. It's got its own flower. Instead of clocks in this game, because that's anachronistic, it uses flowers that you darken the petals of. And so your Enclave has a flower of human antipathy, which sort of, I'll just, as an aside, say, as I said before, the language in this is really flowery. And I might not have known the word antipathy if it were not for D&D, old school D&D, which is kind of one of the ways that sort of thematically I'm trying to be sort of, I'm taking what I enjoyed about old D&D and using it essentially.
Yeah.
So that's why the language is as crazy as it is and includes things like effulgent as a main stat, because not just for like the Buffy the Vampire Slayer reference, but also like we have the internet now. You can learn words and it also captures sort of this faded elegance, things are dying thing in the game.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the idea is you're under threat, and so the threat is every session the Demiurge is going to be pushing to try and make that flower of human antipathy wither, and that happens when the human authorities are like, oh, this is not good. We have to do something about the Enclave. And so basically, as I said before, it's taking those hard holder moves of like creating your hard hold, getting stuff out of it and stuff, and sort of folding it out to players. And the way that I did that initially, for the wealth roll, for example, in Apocalypse World, you roll, and then you have some number of gold to spend. And a barter to spend in Apocalypse World. And I had for a while that it was gold, and that players could say, oh, I have the money this time, and I'm going to spend it either because things are happening behind the scenes that just happen to work out that way, and I'm not actually spending it, or maybe my character is spending money actually as part of their job on behalf of the Enclave. But it always didn't quite work. And so what I came up with instead is I was like, oh, each of these things will give you something roughly equivalent to 1 gold instead of giving you 1 gold. So like one of the options is you can have your lifestyle costs paid, or you can go somewhere and get healed once this game. And so like at the start of each session, you roll and you see the common wheel roll to see like what the state of the Enclave is and what threats come after it. And actually that's one of the hard things, one of the hardest things in role playing is when you go from sitting down as people to pretending, especially for that first session, that first moment of embodiment. So I want there to be as many signals as possible for the Demiurge to know what to do, what to start with, and what to say next. And the having a hard holder when you're playing Apocalypse World is great because you always have those threats coming in, and so now you always have those threats coming in unless people are lucky, and in which case you've got a lot of other things to look at too, like gnosis questions and all that kind of stuff. So it's another thing that I like about it is that it gets the table to create the town that they're in and to invest in it. And then what it does at the other end is a really fun tension, which is that the game ends if the Enclave flower dies, and you can give up your personal improvements that you would ordinarily get from XP and instead spend them on the Enclave. The trader can only do it once, but all the non-human characters can improve the Enclave. You could have never spent a single improvement on yourself and only improve the Enclave if that's what you want. And I'm really curious to see how hard people are going to fight for that and what they'll give up to do that. And I hopefully it's interesting.
And what's interesting to me is a lot of PBTA games that I will run as one shots or short arcs, and that really makes me want to see how that progresses over time.
Yeah, like, are you willing? I tried to make the playbooks have so many great moves that no matter what, and I've heard it over and over again, they're like, I really want that other move, damn it. And so to have that feeling, and then to also be like, well, the Enclave's in real bad straits. We got cops on every corner. You could maybe, if you spent a thing on that, then they'll be calm enough to go back home and let you breathe a little. And I'm really curious to see if people will do it. It's really a fun idea.
Mm-hmm. So just because I'm kind of curious about this, can you describe your favorite agendas and principles in the game and why you included them?
So my favorite agenda is probably play to find out what happens, because, that seems to me, that's kind of the only way I can play. And one of the things that I did with this game is I tried to push that even further and to say, don't prepare there's no fronts. There are threats, but the all you need to do for a threat is come up with a name and a primary impulse, and that's it. You don't need to categorize it or anything. There are other things you can add to threats if you want to embroider them, but I want this to be a pick up and play game for every session you play. So that's I'm really leaning into that. The principles, one of the ones I really like is look for a third side. Again, with this expanse. Well, let me give a bigger example. Mad Max Fury Road, right? So the scene where Furiosa, Max, and the War Boy are all fighting, and they're all on their own side. I was like, that's got to be in the game. And putting a third side in to almost any situation makes it so much more interesting. And especially when it comes to, keeping a town alive, that's real. There's never just two sides when you're dealing with something as big as a community.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I hope that'll bring some verisimilitude. Another one I like a lot sort of tries to address an issue I've had with a lot of PBTA play, which is abandon no one. And so abandon no one is sort of a two-part thing. One is that this is a difficult game. It's about, genocide and stuff and environmental collapse. And so take care of each other. Don't abandon anyone when you go to somewhere terrible, but also don't abandon the characters. Spotlight is an issue in my experience in PBTA games. And to be fair, it's an issue in almost all role-playing games. It's highly reliant on the GM-like figure to be a good person and be good at that skill. And to be fair, I have the abandon no one principle, and I explain to you how to make sure that no one gets abandoned, but it's not as robust as Primetime Adventures, where okay, this episode I'm a 3, that means I'm the star. This episode I'm a 2, that means that I'm important, but I'm not the star, or I'm an antithesis. I'm a 1, I'll only be in a few scenes, I don't get a lot of lines. And I really think I didn't want to throw more cruft onto a PBTA game that was relatively complicated already, but I feel like I want a lot more of that. I want role-playing games to take into account that people sit around bored more often.
Yeah.
But the most important one to me probably is make violence ugly. And so the idea with this is not necessarily make violence bloody. It's an agnostic toward that. Maybe you're into gore or you're not, that's fine. But violence is not a solution. You can't tap someone on the head and make them go unconscious. You're causing traumatic brain injury. When you hurt someone, the people that, even if you're successful, that's going to affect other people. It's going to affect you. So as much as I can, and there's a reaction, which is the MC move name. That's what we call MC moves in this game, called Revisit Past Violence as well. And I want, the game is a violent game. Every playbook gets weapons, or has access to it if they want it. So I want there to be this tension between you're oppressed and violence helps deal with oppression, and scarcity means that you need to be violent sometimes, but it's a consequence. And I think rooting it in a place, it's about stopping murder hoboism to an extent, and rooting it in a place does that too. You can't walk away from the consequences of the people you kill.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we're going to wrap us up and start heading towards our final questions. Where can people get more information about your game?
Demihumans.com. Can you believe it? That was not taken. I just got that last week.
After all these decades of gaming, and it's still that was still out there.
I had to be quiet. Right now that redirects to the evilhat.com/demihumans site, which is where you can go to sign up for. When is this going to come out?
This will probably be our first Gnomecast in the next year.
Okay, so playtests will have closed by then, probably. But that's where you can see like a description of the game. You can see all of the history of the world handouts, playbooks, Demiurge reference material, Enclave creation and rules, and all the interviews and stuff that we do will go up there. So until and unless I make my own website, Evil Hat has me covered in a beautiful way.
Honestly, I was pretty excited when I saw the announcement because I had seen you discussing this game for a while, but I was really happy to see that this is going to be in collaboration with Evil Hat.
Yeah, me too. I've known Fred. Fred gave me the idea for the name for Misspent Youth. I've known him since before I was a designer, and he played in one of the first games of Misspent Youth ever, and helped me make it not suck. So. And what Evil Hat has done is so extraordinary. Like they pay people on time. They're extremely well organized. I've got ADD, and one of my things is if someone isn't standing there tapping their foot looking at me, I don't get any work done. But if they are, I am on fire. So it's just the level of professionalism and smartness. And they're there for me. I'm just really, really happy.
Yeah. I was definitely happy to see that as a development there. So when do you think the game's going to be available in its final form?
So it's too early to say officially. I'm hoping next year, but that's not official.
Right.
But I'm going to do my best to make that happen.
All right. And if people wanted to get a hold of you particularly, where would they be able to find you online?
I'm on Twitter at Robert Bohl, BOHL. I'm also at Facebook, facebook.com/Robert Bohl. I have robertbohl.com, misspentYouthGame.com, or misspentYouth.robertbohl.com. Also, robertbohl.com is actually, right now, it's a bunch of blog entries from when I was working on earlier stages of Demihumans. I'll probably put more up there at some point. So, yeah.
Awesome. And do you have any last words you want to share with the Gnomecast listeners?
No, other than to say thanks a lot for listening. And, it's the Gnomecast. So if someone plays a gnomish inventor out there and makes a fantasy podcast out of it, I want to hear about that.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much for coming on here. I've had a great time talking to you. I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
Oh, it's been quite a pleasure. I'll need to write more games so I can talk to you more.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
This show funded by the Gnome Stew Patreon. You too can become a Patreon backer by following the Patreon link on the Gnome Stew website to the Gnome Stew Patreon. This ad brought to you by Cosmic Consequence Dice. It's not that they don't roll poorly, it's they are attuned to the cosmic balance of the universe, and when they roll bad, it's because you deserve it. You know what you did. If you are enjoying the Gnomecast, you'll probably like many of the other Misdirected Mark shows. Here's one to check out. Bonus Experience. Ray and Monica are two old friends exploring gameplay and design through the lens of diversity, while also sharing some of the dumbest humor gaming has to offer.
Gnomecast is hosted by Misdirected Mark Productions, the media arm of Encoded Designs.